this makes me wonder if I can even do this. I've got so far to go. So far to go. You can't run that far, and you can't do that kind of miles day after day after day. It is physically impossible for you to run across Mongolia. There was something down inside of me that just wanted to prove all of those voices wrong. I was born into circumstances which were far from ideal. As a baby, I was abandoned by my father, living with my mother. I had serious health complications, and we lived in poverty. Those were just some of the obstacles that faced me as a boy growing up in rural Texas. Yet somehow, I always knew that I was inherently valuable, and I refused to let those obstacles limit my life. When people hear my story, they say, well, how did you have polio at a young age? Wasn't that virus eradicated here in the States? And what most people don't know is I was actually born in Mexico. My parents met, got married, and had me in Mexico. And at the time, they didn't have adequate vaccines, and so I contracted polio. At the age of 2, my father leaves my mom and I. No contact, nothing. I never met him. I never got a letter from him. I never got a call. And in fact, my mom, when I was a little boy, sometimes I would ask about this guy, but my mom didn't like to talk about it too much. And so I quickly learned to just avoid the topic. So with my dad not on the scene, it was just my mom left to raise me. We moved into my grandmother's house out in the countryside of Waco, Texas. Earlier today, we were walking through my grandmother's old property, and a lot has changed, but I recognized one landmark, and it was an old, like a trailer home shed thing that we used to store some of our stuff in before we moved to Colorado. And so I walked over to this shed and poked in. Of course, the door's gone, missing on the hinges, all the windows are open. I started looking through all this stuff, and my mind's just blown. It's just so weird to like see stuff of yours as a child 35, 38 years ago. It's crazy. As I was rooting around with the shovel, I looked under some papers, and there were some edge of what looked like an old photo album. And I thought, in all this junk and trash and garbage, if it is a photo album, of course there won't be any pictures in it. And so I didn't want to climb into that shed because, I mean, my tetanus shots probably aren't up to date, and I don't feel like stepping on a snake or a raccoon or who knows what. And so I reached in through the window with the shovel, and I pushed back the first page, and it was blank. And I was like, yeah, of course, it's just gonna be a junky old empty photo album. And then I pushed back another page, and whoa, look at that. Holy cow. Look at that. I don't even know what to say right now. Memories are like supposed to be treasured, and photos represent people's life, and it's their legacy. And there's pictures of me and my mom in a raccoon nest in an abandoned old shack, and it's like me and my story is just garbage. Well, I'm gonna rescue it. Here's my mom. These are baby pictures of me. Oh, this is great. This is so intense. This is me and my mom. Photos of me and my mom. Like, part of me is psyched to find these treasures, but part of me, it's like depressing. Like, this is what your life is. Just a junked up old photo album. I would never in a million years let photos of my wife and my kid just end up in an old abandoned shack. Like, I'm 40 years old, and I'm supposed to be over it. You've abandoned this little kid, Seeing that faded picture of me in that photo album, it was like an illustration to me of what my life could have been like if I allowed those expectations that the world had put on me to conform me into what the world wanted me to be, of the kid without a dad and the little kid and the sick kid. I didn't want the hand that I had been dealt in life to set the trajectory of my life. And I had to set out to redefine myself. So with a courageous decision, my mom decided to move me and her, load up the little Ford Tempo that she drove, and drive us all out to Boulder, Colorado. And I can remember seeing the mountains for the very first time. I'd never seen anything like it. I can remember my mom saying, "Look, Brian, those are the Rocky Mountains." They were just the most incredible things that I had ever seen. And in seeing that, something was ignited in my heart to explore. I had to get in these mountains. But there was a problem. I'd never been into the mountains. I didn't have a dad to show me the mountains. And remember, I was a sick little kid. I needed to deal with the cards that were in my hand. Was I just going to accept these cards and just say, well, the mountains are for people who know how to explore them, or the mountains are for strong people, or the mountains are for people who are healthy? Or was I not going to let that stop me? I can just remember being in 6th, 7th grade, just asking my mom, like, "Hey Mom, can you take me up into the mountains?" She would drop me off in Estes Park, Colorado, inside Rocky Mountain National Park, and I would just go walking through the mountains. I would just explore. And the more I explored, I was like taking this old me off. The more time I spent in the mountains, the more I came alive. And the more I came alive, the less those health problems that had plagued me as a little boy bothered me. The more time I spent in the mountains, the less I worried about not having a dad. The more time I spent in the mountains, the less time I worried about having polio as a child. I looked to the mountains to answer questions that were beginning to develop in my heart, but the mountains did not have the capacity to answer those questions. In high school, during my rowdy days, I wouldn't say that I was confused, but I didn't have much clarity in my life, if that makes sense. I was exposed to all kinds of new ideas. Anything is possible. I was also really conflicted, sitting there in the back of the police car handcuffed, party on the weekends and drink beer and look to get into trouble. And I was just into having fun. So my buddy and I set our sights on Mount Hood, but there was a problem. My mom didn't exactly share the same enthusiasm for this epic climbing adventure. She said, if you're insisting on going on this trip, when you pack up, you might as well pack all of your other stuff and not come back to the house. So I called my mom's bluff and I was like, all right, I'll move out. And I never moved back. Throughout my high school years, off and on, I went to a church that had a youth group. The youth pastor was a guy named Chuck Miles, and he saw something in me that I didn't even know was there. He taught me the trade of carpentry and construction. Man, he was really hard on me, and it was exactly what I needed. He was really like the first father figure to me that I'd ever had in my life. He lived and demonstrated what it means to be a real man, a man of character, and a man that has a disciplined work ethic, and a man that loves his family and lays down his life for others. And I'd never seen that modeled or demonstrated. And seeing the way that he lived his life really highlighted and contrasted the joke that I was. I was enjoying all the privileges of manhood without taking any of the responsibilities of manhood. So I would spend the summers in Estes Park, Colorado, as a climbing guide, and then during the winter, a group of guys and I would migrate over to Winter Park, Colorado, and ski for the winter. One of those winters, I met a really great girl. We hit it off, but I told her right at the beginning, hey, when the snow melts, I'm out of here. I'm going back to Estes and I'm gonna climb. And she thought, yeah, wait till I work my magic on him. Just before I was about to go to Estes Park for the summer, I got a phone call from my grandmother in Texas that my mom had passed away. It was sudden, it was unexpected, and that kind of threw me for a loop. 23 years old, and I'm having to bury the only parent that I've ever known. Last time I literally set foot here was the day after I had finished closing down my mom's house after she passed away. When she passed away, she didn't leave me anything except a key to a safety deposit box, and the only thing that was in it was a big manila envelope, and in that envelope was all kinds of just random stuff that didn't make any sense to me. But as Lissa and I went through all this stuff, it was basically all the information that my mom had ever collected about my dad that I had never met. And one of those things in there was his social security number. And so we were able to track down his whereabouts using that social security number. And he's in, last I heard, he was in on the East Coast in Rhode Island somewhere. This amazing girl that I had met, whose name is Lissa, stuck right by my side through this difficult time. So I grabbed this girl by the arm, and Lissa and I flipped a coin to decide which ski town we were going to. Heads, it was gonna be Telluride, Colorado. Tails, it was gonna be Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Well, tails won out, and my girlfriend and I headed north to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. We were living the dream at that moment. I had my girlfriend, we had a little apartment, I was making good money, life was really good, and I should have known that just as soon as I thought life was gonna get really good, that something was gonna come in and stir it all up, and that's exactly what happened. One Friday, my construction boss came to me and said, hey, you can pick up your paycheck at this job site on Sunday. And I drove to the address that he had given me, and that sucker had tricked me into going to church. The address was at a church, and I walked in and they were meeting in a little chapel. There couldn't have been maybe more than 40 people there. I was like, okay, you tricked me into going to church, I'll sit through it. So I sat through that church service and was miserable the whole time. Got done with that church service and went home, and on the drive home I was like, whew, let's get back to playing in the mountains. But that entire week, all I did was think about the message that preacher spoke and how it really affected my heart. I can't remember what he said. I can't remember what he talked about or what the bottom line was, but I knew that what he was saying was resonating deep inside of here somewhere, and I wanted more of it. The next Sunday, I decided to trick my girlfriend into going to church, and she sat through it and felt just as awful as I did. At the end of the sermon, the pastor gives an invitation to salvation. And then I was so shocked because out of nowhere, my girlfriend stands to her feet and she remembers thinking to herself, oh my gosh, I'm getting saved, as she stands up. And so that day, my girlfriend, Lissa, who is now my wife, stood up and invited Jesus into her heart, and she committed her whole life to following him. Shortly after that, we got engaged, and then we were married right here in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It blows my mind to sit here at this house that Lissa and I built with our own two hands 14 years ago. It's well kept, it's clean, it's beautiful, it's pretty. And this is great evidence of the life that I always knew I wanted to build. I didn't want a life that was musty and old and broken down and falling apart and sick. I didn't want that life. This is the life that I wanted. And this house is evidence of it. It's clean and well kept and sturdy and enduring. And this just makes me so happy to see this house, especially in light of where we've been recently and what I've come from. We had the birth of our first child, who's Selah, and then we had our second child, our son Kai. We knew that I was called to ministry full time. I was ready to give my life to pouring into people. God just whispered to my heart, I want you to go to school at Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I prayed about it a lot, and then I kind of broke the news to you. We got to go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I think I remember you saying, where's Oklahoma?
I remember stepping off the plane when we came down to look at ORU and thought, oh my, what? Where are we?
I finished school in 3 years with a double major of theology and business. Right after finishing school, I come on staff at a church here in Tulsa. Just when we settled into a groove and got comfortable, God started messing with us again. In 2011, this little thought popped into my mind. Hey, it would be cool to do a trail run in Mongolia. Immediately after that, the next thought that I had was, if you're gonna do a trail run in Mongolia, you might as well run across the entire country. And I thought, that's absolutely ludicrous. After not being able to shake the thought, I began to do a little bit of research about Mongolia. And that's when I discovered the situation in Mongolia with thousands of orphaned and vulnerable children living in the capital city. It just broke my heart to see these little children living in and among the garbage without a place to go or clothes to wear or a mom to wipe their cheeks or a daddy to protect and defend them. All the money that we had raised was going to one of two organizations. One of them was a children's orphanage in the capital city. The other organization was a feeding program for children living in and on the edge of the dump in what's called the Ger district, the poorest part of the capital city of Ulaanbaatar. Very hard, brutal way to live. And there are these children that are living in the dump because it's the only place in the city where they can find food, and they dig through the trash for food, and they make shelter out of whatever they can find. And it was really powerful for me. It had a profound impact on my life to see these children that had been abandoned and were living in the dump. And even though I couldn't relate at all to their experience, in some way I felt connected to them because I had been abandoned as a boy by my father. I couldn't shake it. I had prayed and said, God, is this of you? Do you want me to run across Mongolia to raise money and awareness for these orphan and vulnerable children? Are you calling me to do this? How in the world are we going to raise this money? How in the world am I going to be able to run 30 miles a day, day after day? And I felt like early on in the process, I heard the Lord say, your job is to figure out the what. My job is to figure out the how and the why.
And I just knew it was what the Lord was calling us to, but it was so hard to commit. And we held hands and we looked at each other, and you said to me, are we doing this? And the moment I said yes, and we looked at each other and said, we're doing this, just peace just totally came over us.
In July of 2013, Lissa and our two children, we hopped on a plane to head to the other side of the planet, the capital city of Mongolia, which is Ulaanbaatar, to set out on an adventure to run across the entire country. Every mile I had to fight to continue to keep going. My past came back to me a lot, and I thought about limitations that were placed on me as a child, but there was something down inside of me that just wanted to prove all of those voices wrong. With every step I took, I was putting more and more distance between me and those limitations that I had fought so hard to break free from my whole life. When I reached the far eastern border of Mongolia, I had a realization that all of those voices and all of those limitations that I had faced down years ago in my childhood and growing up, and even getting to and through Mongolia, all of those limitations, they had one objective, and that was to hold me back and to keep me from moving forward. I realized that when I put my life in the hands of the Creator and I just simply be obedient to what He is already doing, it's absolutely impossible for me to fail. And it's just so cool to see how God has brought us in this full circle through all of the trials that we've been through and the challenges and the difficulties. To see where He's leading us now makes us think, okay, all of that was really worth it.
Until He calls us on the next adventure.